So I don't really do speeches where I write down things. I kind of gauge the room and decide exactly on the moment what I'm going to talk about. Today I was presented with the Women in Leadership Award at Queen's Park, and it was really special for me because, for one thing, Black women don't normally get recognized in general, much less at a provincial level. I was nominated by my Trinity Spadina counselor, Han Dong. I don't want to mix that up. And we have met each other in passing. He's on a select committee for violence against women, and I sit currently on the provincial roundtable on violence against women. So if you've ever heard of the hashtag, it's never okay. It's one of the things that we're working on. We've also, just yesterday, International Women's Day, we had a royal ascension of a bill that I've been working on for the last year. It's Bill 132, and it creates funding opportunities and changes laws, current laws in effect, that enable women who have been victims of abuse to leave the situation a little bit easier. So, for example, it changes our housing laws, that a woman can leave and can break her housing contract without giving notice if she is a victim of violence within her home. So what that violence looks like, it does not have to be domestic violence. It can be family violence, it can be lateral violence, but she can leave and leave with whatever deposit that she has put down. So that's one of the other things. It also extends the amount of time that women have to be able to report sexual assaults. It changes a lot of laws, and it also creates a lot of funding for universities. So the idea around this law is to create and to actually change the culture of sexual violence on campuses. So campuses now are mandated in how they have to deal with sexual violence reports and how they have to educate every year about sexual violence and create resources to tackle this issue. So I'm very, very proud of it. It got royal ascension, which means that there's no more debating it. In 1 year, it becomes law. In getting royal ascension, it means that it gives all the parties 1 year to get their duck in the road. And I'm really, really happy about it. I'm really proud about it. It took a lot of effort and a lot of energy, and it was ascended yesterday. So I say that to kind of lead into why we should care, and why we should care about the Black Lives Matter movement, and what does that have to do with what I'm really passionate about, which is violence against women. And why we should care about the Black Lives Matter movement is because it's one of the very few current movement or current organizing of bodies, of Black bodies, that has actually taken the time and the initiative to say all Black Lives Matter. And so before, when we were talking about Occupy, when we were talking about like all of these other movements, what is the discussion about? Who is included? And most importantly, who are excluded from the conversation? Black Lives Matter started only as a hashtag and only as a project to organize Black people to liberate and fight against white supremacy. And what the movement has created is opportunities for larger organizations, existing organizations all around the world to come together and say, listen, Black trans women matter, Black women matter, Black LGBT folks matter, Black previously incarcerated people matter, Black currently incarcerated people matter, Black poor people matter, Black guys with their pants down to their ankles matter, Black rappers matter, Black educators, lawyers, housewives matter. We all matter. And so if we all matter, how is this now gonna change the conversation? How is this now gonna make the conversation more inclusive and broaden the spectrum of conversation and therefore bring everybody to the table? What can we do now if all lives matter? If we said to our lives that we treated everybody equally, what does that look like? What would our laws look like? What would our society look like? And I think that, for me, is the most important conversation when we talk about Black lives.
And the conversation that begins with the sentence, Black Lives Matter. In Canada, when we open our mouths and say, we support Black Lives Matter, and when I say we, I mean people like Akio and myself, the first response that we get is, well, at least things aren't as bad here as they are in the United States. In Canada, we are masters of deception to ourselves. We are masters of lying to ourselves. And we've been doing so for literally hundreds of years. There was a group of wannabe expats, people who were coming out of the United States, and what they were fleeing was an actual pogrom. For any Jewish people in the audience who understand what a pogrom means. And they were fleeing a pogrom in Oklahoma. You may have heard about this, Black Wall Street being burnt down. And a lot of people migrated out of the Midwest. As a matter of fact, the largest migration that ever happened in North America was a migration pattern of Black people fleeing Jim Crow in the South. Fleeing lynching, fleeing murders, fleeing rapes, and other forms of violence. The largest migration pattern that ever happened in North America was Black people fleeing from Southern violence. And they found a bottleneck in Canada. Under the Laurier government, not only did Wilfrid Laurier's government block access for Black people who were fleeing Jim Crow in the South and the Midwest, they would say things like, Black people just aren't acclimatized to our cold northern climate, it's not suitable for them. They actually sent emissaries down to the United States to speak to Black organizers, to speak to people like W.E.B. Du Bois, to explain why Black people should be doing the work in the South to make the South a more hospitable environment for themselves and to integrate more into the American fabric. Don't come up here to Canada because we need people like you fighting for civil rights in the South. The health minister under the Laurier government, his name escapes my mind right now, would say things like Black people are bringing diseases into Canada and we have to make sure that we screen them properly. And the ones who are already here, we need to make sure that they're not developing diseases that they might have brought out of the US South. We don't have conversations about Africville, where Black loyalists, not once but twice, Black loyalists who fought under the British Crown, bled and died for the British government and for the monarchy, were shunted off to the most inhospitable territories in Halifax. They were basically given a plot of land that looked like rocks and dirt. They were basically bluffs overlooking the sea. And they actually made life work for themselves. They were able to actually build a thriving community, even though the Halifax government would do really weird things like locate a landfill there and locate a dumping ground for hospital waste, where they didn't have running water. And in the 1960s, the church that they built in Africville was torn to the ground, and the people in the neighborhood were evicted. And it wasn't until the last few years that the Halifax government actually apologized for it. Let's have a conversation about the kind of racism that happens right now. We open our borders to Syrian refugees, and we pat ourselves on the back, and we feel really, really good about that, how hospitable we are to people who are fleeing violence over in Syria. And yet, a Black poet, a Jamaican-born poet with Canadian citizenship, was just refused re-entry into her own country because she didn't have the passport. She didn't have a Canadian passport. Well, if you're a Canadian citizen, to be able to re-enter your own country as a citizen, you do not require your passport, but she was barred from entry. Her name, by the way, is Debbie Young Anita Africa. She's still right now in Trinidad. We don't have conversations about the Peel Police. The chief of police, Jennifer Evans, looked the mayors of both Brampton and Mississauga in the eye, both Bonnie Crombie and Linda Jeffrey, and said that she's going to continue street checks, that is, she's going to continue racial profiling in Peel. Police divisions all across Ontario and across Canada still continue the ugly practice of street checks. And I've had conversations with people who have been street checked, when Justin Trudeau introduced his cabinet that looked like Canada, I spoke to an Indigenous man that was street checked. He went to the event to see all of these amazing, like Jody Wilson-Raybould and I'm sorry, the lady from Afghanistan. Her name's just flying out of my head at the moment. But he saw this amazing cabinet that looked like Canada, and on his way out, he was racially profiled. Why? Just because of the way that he looked. An RCMP officer wanted to know what he was doing and where he was going. What's his name? And he shows him ID. We are masters at lying to ourselves. And I think part of the reason that we do that is because we don't want to face up to what it is that happens on our side of the border. Now, are police shooting down black men at an amazing clip here? Well, they do shoot down black men. You can ask the family of Andrew Loku. You can ask the family of Jermaine Carvey. That includes myself. But it's almost as though when we talk about the Black Lives Matter movement in Canada, what that means for us, what we need to see in Canada before we start to take widespread action is, well, you know, our police gunning down young black men and our neighborhood watch vigilantes following young men down the street and starting confrontations with them and then shooting them when they, you know, when they're overwhelmed. And I guess what bothers me the most about this is because when I have conversations with Akio all the time about the daily, just the stuff that happens on a day-to-day basis. And we have this like relationship with each other where I can just be like, okay, this is all the bullshit that just happened to me. Jesus, okay, well this is all the bullshit that just happened to me. But we can't tell that to some of our friends, some of our associates, some of our lovers, because they're not going to believe us. It's like, okay, well, sure, Andray, I get that you did have this conversation with a police officer, but maybe you did something suspicious. Maybe he, you know, saw the way that you were dressed. Or maybe you were speeding. Our friend September Anderson wrote a column in the Globe and Mail that went up today. And it was, if you haven't read it, I recommend that you do go look up September Anderson's column today in the Globe and Mail. We just celebrated International Women's Day, which is a great thing. I'm not going to, I mean, absolutely. But do we celebrate black women? Do we talk about the issues that black women face? Do we talk about the issues that women of color widespread face? We'll talk about, for example, the women's right to vote in Canada, but we don't talk about when it was that black women earned the right to vote in Canada, which was a very long time after white women earned the right to vote. We talk about women earning 73 cents on the dollar for what a man earns. But we don't talk about the fact that black women earn 55 cents on the dollar for what a white man earns. It basically goes like this. White men, white women, black men, black women. We don't have conversations about Margaret Sanger, basically the proud parent of Planned Parenthood, who was a noted eugenicist. We don't have conversations about, well, how did birth control and the modern gynecological industry come to be? It was experimenting on black women's bodies, many of them Afro-Latino. So when we have the conversation about Black Lives Matter, it is not a statement to say that our lives matter more than other people. It's a plea. The lady who coined the hashtag, Alicia Garza, when she wrote Black Lives Matter for the first time, it was out of the wretched despair she felt after George Zimmerman was convicted for murdering Trayvon Martin. Or convicted rather, acquitted of having murdered Trayvon Martin. And she wrote this heartbreaking plea to black people all across America and North America, just to say that your lives matter. I know that the justice system doesn't think it does, but we know that it does. And her friend, Patrice Cullors, coined the hashtag Black Lives Matter. What connection does that have here to Toronto? Well, the wife of Patrice Cullors is a very good friend of Akio's. Her name is Jay. She lives right here in Toronto. She's one of the leaders for the Black Lives Matter movement here in Toronto. What does it matter here? Well, given the fact that we've been having this conversation on party for such a long time, we've been having this conversation on institutional racism, the fact that if you look at boards of directors, if you look at senior management, if you look at the C-level for our financial industry, for just about any industry in Canada, if you look at our cabinet, if you look at our political leadership, we are invisible, we are almost absent. It's amazing to me that we will hand out the key to the city to a Toronto rapper, when at the very same time, Michael Tanovich, a professor at the University of Windsor, very intelligent, did a study of the amount of times that judges and defense lawyers and prosecutors have used rap lyrics to try and indict black people. That a defense lawyer once used lyrics that a young black woman had written to explain why, well, you seem to have intimate knowledge of sex and genitalia and such, so this sexual assault really couldn't have happened. You were willing and you were consenting, weren't you? That's what we mean when we say Black Lives Matter. A plea to the rest of you in Canada to start listening up, to start believing us when we tell you that our lives do matter. Not more or less than yours, but we matter. Thank you.
After listening to these two, I wonder why I'm here. They might cover the spectrum, but I should take up from one thing that you said, because I'm a liberal. It was a happy day to see Justin Trudeau stand and become Prime Minister. And then my face fell flat when I realized I'm not part of this Canada, because he said this is Canada. There's no black person in this Canada. This is where it starts. The little things we were not noticed then. When are we not noticed? I started law school and I realized very quickly I could not become a Bay Street lawyer, because I realized that law has actually been used to subjugate people over the years. And I always say this to people, and we say it all the time. Can anybody tell me what the rule of thumb means? International Women's Day. Tell me what the rule of thumb means.
It's the length of the stick you can use to beat your wife.
Exactly. We use it, we don't know what it means. The law told men they could beat their wives. The law told people they could enslave people. The law told slaves you couldn't run away. So it struck me very quickly that at the same time the law is supposed to protect us, it can be used really harshly against people who don't have a seat at the table. You don't have a seat at the table, nobody's going to speak for you. There's a case called Clayton and Farmer, heard at the Supreme Court. Clayton and Farmer is this case where a bunch of black people are out partying. It turns out, surprise, surprise, somebody decided to bring a gun to the party. They were in a particular car, and the police were called, and they said they were told that there was a gun in a particular car. Police descend on the area, and they decide to search every single car in the parking lot. Clayton and Farmer, who were not in a car that was described in the 911, were arrested for possession of a firearm. And the argument was, did the police have a right to search the car without a warrant? To this point, it seemed to everybody that they didn't have a right to search the car because they didn't have what they call reasonable and probable grounds. But the Supreme Court, in a strange turn, and it's one of the saddest days in my life reading a Supreme Court judge basically say, when those people decide to party, I will let the police deal with them as they see fit. You look at the judgment and you read it very closely, that's what Justice Abella said. We're not going to question what the police are doing reasonable probable grounds in areas that we don't understand. In other words, when it's those people, go ahead, do it. Well, this didn't start from now. This started from a long time ago. Has anybody heard of the case of Smithers? The law of manslaughter changed in Canada after 200 years, and the de minimis rule was brought into play. This was in the 70s. A young black man was trying to make his life matter and decided to play hockey. In those days, I don't think that was a good idea. He was called all sorts of names on the ice. I almost said I pitched. On the ice. And after the game, he went to confront one of the guys who called him the most names. He threatened to punch the guy, and the guy fell down and choked on his own vomit and died. Mr. Smithers was charged with manslaughter, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court. And for the first time, and a professor of mine said this once, when the Supreme Court goes to Latin, you know they don't know what they're talking about. They brought in the de minimis rule. In other words, just because he was afraid of you, just because he died choked of his own vomit, the fact that you actually physically came over to assault him makes you guilty of manslaughter. Well, when I went to law school, nobody told me that Smith was a black guy. They omitted all the names that he had been called in that. Well, and interestingly enough, manslaughter, he cannot use provocation in manslaughter. He can only use it in murder. So, in all the 200 years of case law, Smithers was not guilty, but this time, the Supreme Court found it necessary to make him guilty. I don't know, and I was one of 3 black people in the class of about 180, and I asked the question, did race have anything to do with it? And I was told no. And all these years later, I say to myself, I can't see it. I think it had a lot to do with it. So, from my perspective, the law that we see as protecting us and bringing us together and so on can be used in another way. And if you don't have people at the table to say, maybe that's not right, nobody's going to see it. Friends of mine who come to me and tell me they're going to judicial trials. And because they've spent a lot of time with me, they know how to react. And so when they go all the way to Barrie, and some people from Toronto go to party in Barrie and they happen to be black and they get in a fight with bouncers. And the Crown walks in and tells the judge, these people come into our lovely establishment or into our lovely establishments and these people and these people and these people. I hate that phrase, these people. We're all people. What's the these people? But when you say these people, you don't have to say black people. So yes, at the end of the day, it's there. You don't have to say it. And it's always underlying. Desmond Cole once said, I heard him speak and I was amazed, and he said, you cannot legislate love. You can only spread it.